Welcome viewers, this is ATV special edition. In today's episode, I met Dr. Costentinos BT, a well-known Ethiopian economist. We know him very much while he's delivering an in-depth economic analysis in different areas and topics for the last many years. Today, I met him to talk about Ethiopia's promising wheat production and its prospects in the future. I am Ogayo Mulda. Let me give chance for our guest, Dr. Costentinos BT. Could you please, we know you, but for our audiences, can you please say something about yourself? What are you doing right now currently?
Yeah, well, my name, as you said, is Costentinos. I've been working with the United Nations as Senior Policy Advisor in New York. And then after that, I was working with the African Union as Chairman of the Anti-Corruption Advisory Board. Now I spend my time teaching. I also work with humanitarian organizations and also some private sector consulting work.
Very good. Thank you very much for your time. All right. Coming back to my topic, today we are going to talk about Ethiopia's promising wheat production. We are witnessing like Ethiopia is registering remarkable results in terms of wheat production. In the same token, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, while addressing the 13th ordinary session of the House of People's Representatives, he reassured that Ethiopia is registering a remarkable progress in terms of wheat production. At the same time, documents or data I have gathered says, or scholars on the area argue that Ethiopia needs to harvest like 6.5 million tons of wheat to quench the demands of the citizens, while currently around 4.5 million tons of hectares of wheat is under production. So these are two arguments. So what do you say? Ethiopia's wheat production is a success or a hype?
Well, I think let's start from the premises. Ethiopia is a well-endowed country in terms of agricultural land and its water resources. According to the Ministry of Agriculture, Ethiopian rivers or river basins export about 122 billion cubic meters of water every year on the average. And we have about 74 million hectares of agricultural land. So Ethiopia should not be in a position to be able to import food at any time. The problem and the challenge has been to have our human resources, water resources, and our land resources to function in synergy. So the potential for Ethiopia to produce food is very, very high. In fact, at one time I remember the US government agencies were saying that Ethiopia is the breadbasket of Africa. And the fact that we have now this new initiative in terms of production of wheat especially is an encouraging trend for me. For one, this is not rocket science. Agriculture is an established business in many countries. And therefore, it is the government willingness, it is the ability to create the synergy between our water resources, agricultural resources, and our human resources. So I believe that what Prime Minister Abiy said in Parliament is feasible. It can be done. There is no question about it. The main issue is, I can go back a little bit in history. During Emperor Haile Selassie's time, we had what you call the Chilalo Agricultural Development Unit. This was initiated with Swedish support of only $4 million. Today, we see RC and barley, which have been the subject of that development, producing so much wheat and barley and other oil seeds. That experiment was so successful, it was going to be replicated in Wolaita, called the Wolaita Agricultural Development Unit, or WADU, and in Shiraro, in Tigray, where it's called the Tigray Agricultural Development Unit, TADU. But when the Derg came, the focus became on redistributing land resource between the population, and therefore these projects were stopped. Today, I see the same trend coming up, and this is an important trend in terms of developing our potential to be able to feed ourselves, not only in wheat production, but in the production of so many fruit trees, export commodities that can help us a lot. So the initiative of the government is very commendable, and in time we're going to learn lessons. My first job was in the agricultural sector, in the sugar industry. And this was a private company that developed the Wanji Shiwa and Matahara sugar factories. So these areas are very significant for Ethiopia. At that time, we were exporting sugar, actually. And now with the population increasing so much in Ethiopia, well, during the emperor, now the population is almost 4 times higher. But our agricultural production has not come up to that level, and therefore it's very important and significant that the government is focusing on the production of commodities that are going to be used by our own population. Secondly, if you look at the import in Ethiopia, we're importing wheat, edible oil, and other foods. And the fact that we produce these foods in country could mean that we're going to save a lot of foreign currency that could be used for development purposes. So for me, this is a very encouraging trend.
Similarly, as Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said, the data I've gathered from Minister of Agriculture and once while addressing a media, Mandefro Negise said, Ethiopia, while suffering from the termination of the AGOA privilege, is as well registering commendable results in terms of wheat production and productivity in all parts of the country. So what are major areas, key points, or measures taken by the government for this result?
Well, in fact, yes, we had AGOA privilege, and we're using only few commodities in the AGOA privilege. You know, the African Growth and Opportunity Act provides about 7,000 items. When this was designed by President Clinton's administration, I was working in the United Nations in New York at that time, and this was supposed to transform the aid into trade between developed nations and Africa. Today, we have so many opportunities of this nature, like China has provided 300 billion worth of products that are going to be imported duty-free into China from Africa. The other opportunity, of course, is the African Free Continental Trade Area also provides the same opportunity as AGOA. So frankly, the suspension of AGOA might have a temporary effect, especially on the 200,000 female workers that have been working in that sector. But the agenda should be, if we produce enough here, and we have now so many industrial parks, this could be processing so many goods with added values that would increase the cost benefit of the production that we have. I'll give you an example. For example, our major commodities of export are coffee, sesame, and oilseeds. And if we can process this and add value to them, 1 kilogram of coffee, which is not processed, green coffee, would fetch about $4 today. But when you go to the US, a kilogram of coffee anywhere in a store would cost more than $40. So if we add some value to our products using our industrial parks and bringing in other investors who could help us processing this, then it might be worthwhile in terms of getting added value to our exports. And therefore, I believe that it's not just replacing AGOA, but we have a very important sector that's going to generate important foreign currency for this country. We can add to that other sectors like the mining sector, which is coming up in Ethiopia now. the petroleum development and gas development areas that we're going to work. So Ethiopia has a great potential not to be able to depend on foreign aid and foreign assistance.
As you have known, like Kenya is a key partner in a neighboring country of Ethiopia. Last time, Kenyan president, the new president, William Ruto, came to Ethiopia for an official visit. So on that visit, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and William Ruto have agreed, like Ethiopia's vote to export wheat for Kenya within a year or in the next year. Do you think it is achievable while still the nation by itself is importing wheat from different parts of the country? That's one question. If so, what is its benefit in terms of integrating neighboring countries in terms of economic integration? So what kind of benefit it will bring? First of all, do you think it is achievable? Is that promising?
Well, you see, I think Ethiopia is one of the most integrated countries in the Horn of Africa, because if you look at, for example, Ethiopia is supplying electric power to Djibouti, to Sudan. It's going to provide electricity support to Kenya. So exporting agricultural commodities to our neighboring countries wouldn't be that difficult. In fact, at one time, I remember we used to export corn to Kenya. There was surplus production here in Ethiopia. So as long as we can produce surplus in this country, there is no reason why we cannot find markets for them. The world today, it cannot feed its own population. And the fact that you have a huge middle class that's coming up in China and India means the consumption of food is growing higher and higher. And therefore, food is going to continue to be more expensive. And added to this is the current Ukraine-Russia conflict, where 30% of global wheat and edible oil has been provided by these two countries. Now we're having a serious problem with that. Added to this is the global price of petroleum products has gone up because of this war. And therefore, it's very important that we focus on our resources, what we can produce, we export them, and of course we can import whatever we can do. Ethiopia has done a lot of work in terms of infrastructure development. That was the prerequisite for agricultural development, industrial development, unless you have communication routes, roads, railways, unless you have energy production units like hydro dams or solar energy or wind energy, there is no point talking about agro-industry. Therefore, Ethiopia has done a lot of work in this area. Over 100,000 kilometers have been built so far. We have more than 20 hydro dams that will be generating sufficient electricity. Like the Grand Renaissance Dam will be producing about 6,000 megawatts. So with this, we can push our agricultural potential to its limit, literally. And exporting food for us could mean permanent supply of food internally in our markets, and also getting the necessary foreign currency to be able to import technology, to be able to import raw materials that we don't have in this country, to be able to import all the necessities in life here, including industrial development. So for me, this is a game changer.
What do you think? What do you see? I just want to see, look, your projection in terms of economy. What will be, what do you suggest, or what do you project after like 5 to 10 years regarding Ethiopia's economy? What would it be?
Well, you know, Ethiopia has been in a development trajectory for a long period of time. The Financial Times is normally a conservative paper that doesn't mention much about Africa except resource extraction like petroleum, minerals, and others. But in its report in 2020, it said that the fastest growing economy between 2010 and 2020 has been Ethiopia, even much more than China or India, the fast growing economies of the world. So we have the potential to grow. And I think in the next 5 years, I believe that given that we solve some of the problems we have today, including peace and security, our health systems, especially that have been compromised by COVID, then it will be Ethiopia has the greatest potential in terms of not only just feeding its people, but ensuring livelihood security for its citizens, and of course, being a major hub for development in the Horn of Africa. We have big markets around us. Sudan is a big market, South Sudan is a big market, and then of course the East African community is a big market. And therefore, what we need to do is, number one, the biggest challenge we have in Ethiopia is the public administration and development administration at the district Warada level. It's very important that we have the appropriate people with the kind of skills, educational background, and experience in these districts. At Addis Ababa University, we've been training students at the master's and PhD level for development administration and public administration. But I don't see these young people going and working in the waradas or in the zones. Most of them, they work for NGOs or they go and teach in the universities. So it's very important and significant that we have the appropriate people at the warada level. The warada is the center of development. If you have the best people at the federal level, the best people at the regional level, it doesn't make sense. What makes sense is the warada administration, because the warada administrator she the investment head, she is the one developing agriculture and food security, she is the one responsible for health, education, for everything, mining, and therefore whatever political personalities you have in the warada, they should be supported with professionals who can do this. I'm sure the kind of agricultural work that we're doing now in terms of to be able to export wheat abroad is the government has focused in this warada so much, they have put their best minds in this place. So we need to do that in every warada in Ethiopia. I know the Ministry of Agriculture has what you call development agents, but at one time I went to Benishangul to do what development plan for supported by the UN, and the problem is much of these development agents have nothing to do there because you don't have the kind of public administration system to get them to work, and also the kind of utilities that they need with them to be able to support our farmers. The second thing is farmers training is also another important issue. When you do, for example, cluster farming, you train the farmers. Of course, you don't train them about farming, they know about it. But new irrigation systems, like drip irrigation, where you save a lot of water, infrastructure that should be able to support the cluster farming systems. And if you go into irrigated systems, these are very complex areas. I know vast tracts of land in the Afar area has been rendered useless because of flood irrigation that creates a lot of salination in the soil. So it's very important to look into this, and our agricultural trained experts, agricultural engineers, agronomists are supposed to come and help in this. So this kind of focus would help. And probably the most important part is also public-private partnership, where we can bring major food-producing companies abroad to be able to do what our farmers cannot do. Major cities like Addis Ababa will need massive amount of food to be imported from the rural areas. Institutions like universities, the military, the police, they will need to be supplied with food commodities. And therefore, it's very important that we have both mechanized commercial agriculture and peasant-based agriculture. The peasant-based agriculture is more sustainable in terms of its output. This is very inclusive in terms of getting the farmers to benefit from it and improve their livelihoods. But commercial agriculture would also be useful in terms of increasing our export potential, in terms of bringing in new technologies into our agricultural system, in terms of bringing in water-saving technologies. As I said earlier, the huge amount of water resource we have in Ethiopia is something that we need to use immediately. Other areas also, for example, like coffee, for almost a century we've been doing the same thing. Now we need to focus on it in terms of the Ethiopian specialist coffee is something that's on demand globally. And therefore, that's another area of food security where coffee exports would support you with the necessary foreign currency to be able to import technology and other kinds of resources to support our agricultural development. So these are areas where the government is focusing now, and that's why I say it's very encouraging.
All right, thank you. Now, let us see the bigger picture, African continent in general, as well Ethiopian context in particular. African continent, by its very nature, is rich in natural resources and rich in arable lands and so on and so forth, in minerals and so on and so forth. However, the continent is still suffering from poverty, drought, and so other problems. As well, most of African countries are receiving aid and donation from donor countries around the world. So what shall be done so as to bring prosperity, development, and self-sufficiency to these countries?
Well, you see, the problem in Africa is, as you said, we have so much resource in terms of water, in terms of land, in terms of minerals, petroleum products. In fact, these have become a resource curse. For example, take Democratic Republic of Congo. On paper, it's the richest country in the world. It has minerals worth $24 trillion. It's even richer than the United States, China, or the combined GDP of Europe. But the problem, as I said earlier, is the system of public administration. It's not amenable to development. That's one challenge that we have in this continent, is that governments have not been responsible to develop their own citizens. The second major problem is conflicts. For example, if you see the Sahel, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, all these countries had serious military coups and counter-coups recently. Sudan has rich agricultural potential. It's the same thing. We have a military coup there that's continuing with civilian protests going on for almost 2-3 years now. So conflicts are the biggest problem. DRC has conflicts. Now, DRC is the biggest supplier of lithium for electric cars, for example. It's the biggest supplier of coltan, which we use in our cell phones, computer systems, and everything. So the problem has been we couldn't create responsible governance in Africa by our governments. It's been improving a lot, but it's not gone to that level. I've worked in about 26 African countries, and this is what I see across the board. After conflicts comes a serious problem of corruption. Africa loses about $160 billion a year to corruption. And this is probably twice the amount of aid Africa gets from the Western governments. But all these diamonds, coltan, and others are taken illegally out of the continent. Again, DRC is a good example where private companies have private armies to mine and take away the DRC's diamonds out of the country. And yet, even today, we see in North Kivu, where Lumumbashi, where you have a lot of these minerals, a lot of fighting is going on. And this is encouraged by the companies that exploit Africa's resources. At one time, even governments were foreign governments were even participating in this. So corruption is a very important and fundamental problem that Africa has to resolve. As I mentioned earlier, I served as the chair for the Anti-Corruption Advisory Board for the African Union, and the level of corruption you see in Africa is mind-boggling. It's really bleeding the continent. People are running away with money to Western countries, to Dubai now, that's the new destination. And of course, the last destination has become China, where there is no accountability to the international system in terms of financial transfers. So if we can solve these problems of conflicts, corruption, and public administration and good governance, Africa could be the future of this world because it has resources in terms of young people who are able to work. We have young Africans that are developing so fast. For example, if you see Nigeria, South Africa, and Senegal You have young people who are using financial technology linked to telecoms who have reached over $1 billion in terms of their capital. Young, very young people. This is what you call fintech, and this is what I hope Ethiopia will be developing once our telecom systems become functional. So this, once they pass the 1 million mark, you call them unicorns. So the unicorn status in Senegal, Nigeria, and South Africa has become phenomenal growth. They're using technology to be able to work through finance. So this is the future of the world. And we have also a huge amount of trained manpower in Africa. Take Ethiopia, with the 50 public universities we have, they're producing lots of graduates. All this, what they need, these graduates, is the 6 months internship somewhere to work, sit down, and develop their skills so that, you know, whatever they have learned in the university could be translated into experience. And therefore, Africa has a future. The biggest problem, as I mentioned earlier, is good governance, conflicts, and corruption. So governments to this end have not been able to be responsible to their own populations. I'll tell you, since 1991, with the fall of the Soviet Union, elections have been undertaken in Africa. Literally every country has an election now. But elections are, while they are an important part of democracy, they are not the only kind of democratic activity that we have to be undertaking. People have to be politically aware of who they elect in terms of who is going to serve their best interests. Very often, it's ethnicity that comes into this work. Somebody from some ethnic group would say, okay, this is my ethnic group, you should elect me. So a lot of education has to go into this, developing the political culture within the African population. But of course, this generation has this important duty, like the post-independence generation we had, Emperor Haile Selassie, Kenyatta, Nkrumah, and all of them. They had the responsibility to develop the African continent, to bring Africa into the position where it can be equal to other continents. But military coup d'etats, and 110 military coup d'etats have been undertaken since then. And these have disrupted African development completely. And they continue to disrupt African development even today. As we heard last week, Burkina Faso had its second coup in 8 months. And therefore, it's very important we have to have stable governments, political stability, and also an inclusive development where young people that are graduating from schools, universities, are part and parcel of the economy. Unless we have young people participating in this, they will revolt. They will go out on demonstrations. The armed force will continue killing these young people. That disrupts society. And therefore, it's very important we look into harmonious kind of development where peace and security become an important part of our work.
On behalf of my institution, ATV, I would like to say thank you for your precious time.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, viewers, this is my time I spent with Dr. Costentinos BT, a well-known Ethiopian economist. We have raised several topics ranging from wheat production up to Africa, the continent's economic prospects. I hope I will meet him some other time, raising several topics. For now, this is enough. Thank you very much for watching. I am Wagaye Mulina, the producer of the program. Stay with other programs of Ethiopia Television. Thank you very much.